From the time the Romulans made a comeback in Season 1 to the warm and fuzzy final card game scene of Season 3, here are Star Trek Picard's most iconic moments. Starting with when the Romulans showed up again. They'd been a part of the Star Trek world for a long time, so when they came back in Season 1, it was a big deal for the show. The Romulans were a big part of what happened before Romulus was destroyed, so their return added a new level of mystery to the show. Starfleet decided against trying to save the people of the Romulan homeworld from a coming supernova in the wake of a deadly attack on Federation shipyards on Mars. Admiral Picard quit Starfleet because he didn't like how it wasn't doing anything. The supernova wiped out Romulus, killing billions of people and forcing people to flee all over the galaxy. The majority of Romulans were left in terrible conditions, but a secret group called the Zhat Vash were able to get into Starfleet in order to get rid of all manufactured life. One of the most interesting things about Picard Season 1 is the contrast between the psychologically broken Romulans on refugee worlds like Vashti and the Zhat Vash Romulans, who went even further with their natural paranoia and suspicion. In the end, Star Trek Picard Season 1 doesn't judge the Romulans, because it's possible for them to take a better road on the galactic stage or go back to their worst tendencies. The fact that they were on the show also made me think about loyalty, betrayal, and politics, which gave the show's issues more depth. Speaking of important characters returning, here's another one that was a blast from the past. 7 of 9 making a comeback. In the beginning, the news that Jerry Ryan would be returning to the Star Trek world seemed like the worst kind of stunt casting, a clear way to cash in on fans' nostalgia and get more people to watch the new Star Trek Picard sequel series. Even in the main Trek timeline, Picard and 7 of 9 had never met, and at first glance, the only thing they had in common was that they'd both been hurt by the Borg. What could her being in this story, which seems to have so little to do with her, possibly add? As it turns out, everything. 7's return doesn't just add new and unexpected layers to Picard's personal journey, although I have to admit that short scene between them, in which they admit they still struggle every day to stay human decades after they were both assimilated, it's the kind of deep, meaningful character work that we've dreamed about. Her appearance also adds to and deepens her story in a way that's both unique and meaningful, giving us a whole new and improved way to understand the character. But it isn't just moments of characters returning, it's also times that change the trajectory of the show completely. Daj's death in the first episode shaped everything. She only showed up in the first episode of Star Trek Picard called Remembrance. In that episode, she was killed by the Zhat Vash, a Romulan Tal Shiar group. In fact, Jean-Luc only knew Daj for a few hours, but her death made the retired admiral want to go back to space to save her sister Soji from the same fate. The Romulans predicted that Daj would die when the destroyer came, and that's exactly what happened. In the first season of Star Trek Picard, Daj's death was stated as a fact, and it was never suggested that she might still be living. Still, Daj was the spark that started all of the action and drama in Star Trek Picard Season 1, and it seems like a waste to lose such an interesting character. This scene was only important because of how it moved the plot though. Other times, there are moments that become a season's saving grace, like this next one did, Q's return in Season 2. In the last episode of the second season of Star Trek Picard, there's an important scene that makes up for some of the show's worst mistakes. In the second season, Jean-Luc Picard ran into his enemy Q, who wanted to teach the Starfleet skipper a lesson in typical Q fashion. In the Season 2 ending, Farewell, it became clear that Q had set up a dystopian future. The attempted murder of Jean-Luc's ancestor in 2024, and a new type of Borg to force Picard to face the death of his mother and let go of his guilt. The plot was likely a lot more involved than just sending Jean-Luc back to his childhood. Even though Q's plan for Picard in Star Trek was confusing, it had a surprising emotional heart that made up for Season 2 of Picard being too complicated. In one scene between Picard and Q, 30 years of Star Trek and 10 episodes of Star Trek Picard Season 2 came to a very moving end. It's a good way to end their love-hate relationship, and a rewarding way to handle Q in this more introspective Star Trek show, which helps explain some of Season 2's more confusing parts. Of course, there are moments when we see our titular character in an entirely new light, And these moments are actually way better than characters returning to screen, like when Picard wears a crazy costume and does an accent. In the episode Stardust City Rag, Picard and the rest of the crew go to Free Cloud to meet up with Bruce Maddox. Heroes like Seven and Picard aren't welcome in this shady town, so they have to put on a mask and try to make a deal for Maddox. Even though everyone wears a crazy costume, there's something special about Jean-Luc Picard's beret, eye patch, and over-the-top French voice. Maybe this is why Star Trek The Next Generation didn't try to give Patrick Stewart a French accent. I know that there's probably nothing that can top Picard wearing an eye patch, but this next moment came pretty close when I saw the best ship return on the screen: the arrival of the USS Zheng He. It was first seen on the Season 1 end of Star Trek Picard. Acting Captain Will Riker, played by Jonathan Frakes, was in charge of him. Starfleet didn't show up in the story until the last episode of Star Trek Picard's first season, Et in Arcadia Ego Part 2. When they did, they came with an armada to save Jean-Luc and the synthetic people of the planet Coppelius from a Romulan warbird fleet. Riker showed up on the Zheng He, backed by hundreds of similar starships, just in time, like the cavalry. He said that the Zheng He was the best ship in Starfleet, but Trek fans didn't get to see it in battle to see if he was right. However, they can trust Riker's word that the ships are the best in Starfleet. Even though we don't want the show to end, Star Trek Picard just gave us one of the best ends to a series ever, and it actually makes it on the list of most iconic moments from the show. In the last scene of Star Trek Picard, the famous crew of the Enterprise D is having a party. They're putting off the end of their time together by having one last drink and toast. After Picard reads a line from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar that fits the situation, he pulls out an ace of spades. The rest of the night spent playing poker, which is a standard Next Generation crew tradition. The camera moves around the table, catching laughs and small moments between each person. Then it goes up and mirrors the final shot of TNG by showing the crew gathered around the table from a bird's eye view. Even though the scene itself only lasts about 5 minutes, Metalis suggested that when Picard Season 3 comes out on Blu-ray, you might get to see a little more of the footage from that day. Those thoughts were right on the mark, because the last shot gives me all the warm, fuzzy feelings of love, hope, and found family that the Next Generation's always stood for. Even though I'd love to see the adventures continue in a legacy spin-off, this ending's the right happy one. The best part was how the entire Next Generation crew survived. So far, there might be another spin-off in the works, but it doesn't look like there are any plans for a 4th season. But if it does release, it'll come many, many years into the future. That's all for Star Trek Picard's most iconic moments.